Thank you, Darren. Thanks very much. And can I extend my welcome to everybody today as well. We have 173 attendees now, which is a fantastic number, and we're very honoured that you've all dialed into this webcast today. So thank you very much for that. So as Darren said, we're really excited to launch this new program, and it's a flexible program, adaptable program that enables you as trainers to build your own content sets around some of the assets that are provided for you. What I think is important, though, before we look at that set of contents, which Tracy will help us with later on this webcast, I think it's important that we remind ourselves why we're doing this. Why has Microsoft enlisted the help of various experts from around the world in the field of education to put together a set of contents for professional development experts like yourselves? And the answer really is that the education space is still in need of drastic change. We know the world of work is changing constantly. We know that the world of technology is changing constantly. Unfortunately, the world of education is only changing in very small pockets and not system-wide. So we need to reflect a little bit, first of all, today on what is 21st century teaching and learning, and why is ICT important in that process. So I'm going to go through a few slides now which will help us to think about that a little. So to begin with, I think it's very clear now that there's a global crisis. A report released at the end of last year by the McKinsey Institute called Education to Employment said that there's 75 million young people unemployed in the world today because businesses can't find enough skilled workers to fill job vacancies. 75 million young people between the ages of 18 and 25 is about 20% of that demographic. So there are jobs available for them, but there's 20% of them who are not in work. The main reason for that, according to 40% of employers, is the lack of skills required to fill those jobs. By skills, we're talking about non-academic type qualifications or skills. So we may have students in school with great academic qualifications, but they're missing in some critical areas for employers. An example here on this slide, you can see that in these cities, these are a few examples to talk about quickly now. You can see the demand for high-skilled jobs in technology in those cities, and you can see the gaps in the workforce that they can hire. So healthcare and information technology are the key areas for these gaps, and you can see just in those cities, Sydney, for example, over 1,500 skill gaps for jobs that require Microsoft-type qualifications. So we have this global crisis going on. The McKinsey Institute's report that I mentioned basically has two very simple solutions. They say that education providers and employers should step into each other's worlds more often and more regularly. And that's really to think about identifying the missing skills that we have in those students, even schools, to help schools address those skills, and maybe even to work with schools to co-design curriculum and learning activities to provide those missing skills that they're looking for in their school leaders. So a bit of context around what it's like to be a young person today. Here's some information that is actually a couple of years out of date now, so it's perhaps even larger numbers now. But there are 1.5 million pieces of content being created and shared on social media every day. There's 120,000 blogs being created every day. This works out at about 2 blogs per second. So that's by 15-year-olds only. So that's by people who are in their final year of school. This is the kind of world that they're living in. This is how they're communicating with each other. This is how they're creating knowledge and sharing it with each other. So we're living in a technological revolution. We are well into it now, and yet schools somehow are still not quite addressing these kind of lifestyles that the students have. And certainly our job as trainers and professional development providers is to make sure we can help teachers to try and address some of these skills in their students. Just sticking with students for a second, I want you to have a look at this slide here. This is some research that's been taking place in the University of Bristol in the UK, where the neuroscience department have been scanning the brain activity of students as they undertake lesson activities. So here's 2 brain scans that were taken of a 13-year-old boy. The one on the left with the blue colouring on it shows limited brain activity, and therefore we can assume limited engagement. The one on the right with the red colouring on it is heightened brain activity, and therefore heightened engagement. So these are brain scans of activities being carried out in the classroom by a student. I want you to just have a think about those 2 pictures. See if you can decide what you think the student might be doing to generate those brain scans. So for enable us to do this very quickly, I want you to use the select tool, which is at the bottom of your screen. You'll see a little tick icon. I want you to select that, and I want you to just put the tick where you think, on the left-hand column, the less active brain activity, what the student might be doing to generate that brain scan. And on the right-hand column, what you think the student might be doing to generate that more engaged brain scan. I'll give you just a minute to think about that. Great. Okay, some great responses. So it seems most likely then that the brain scan on the left, the less active one with the blue color, the student is perhaps doing something fairly sedentary like watching television or reading or listening to a lecture. Whereas the brain scan on the right, the more engaged brain, perhaps they're doing something a bit more interactive, such as using Facebook or perhaps being on the internet or writing. So if we just go back to those images for a second, they're actually carrying out exactly the same activity. The students were searching on the internet. So on the left image there, the blue with the blue color and the less engaged brain, the student was asked to search for just a basic factual piece of information. So they were using the internet to carry out a search on Bing. The right-hand brain scan, the student was using the internet in a more applied way. So they were searching for information. But what they were doing alongside that was thinking about how they could use that information. They were perhaps managing multiple data sets and aggregating data. Perhaps they were applying the learning the information they were finding into their learning. So although they were doing the same activity, one of them could be described as a naive user of the internet, and one is a perhaps more experienced user of the internet. The point that I'm trying to make here is that actually the technology is not the solution. They're not engaged because the technology is in the classroom. The left-hand image suggests that technology isn't engaging them at all. What engages them is how they use that technology and for what purpose. So part of our role as teachers is to think about how can we design learning activities that enable students to use technology and other resources to achieve the kind of brain engagement activity that's due on the right-hand side there. We can't assume that technology on its own is enough to keep students engaged. It is an important message, I think, to carry with us into our training. Here's some more information on brain activity. If you look at this slide here, you can see the activity of, this is one individual student, you can see the activity of their brain over a 7-day period. You can see, for example, the yellow line on the right-hand side there, where their activity in the classroom, their brain activity is pretty low, sometimes almost minimal. By contrast, the blue line, when they're asleep, their brain activity is higher and more engaged, which is perhaps a damning indictment of some lessons that the student was in. But you can see as well where their activity is at the highest. It's when they're doing study and homework. So I want us just to think a little bit here about why this might be. So if you're able to very quickly open the shared notes pane on your place, just type in some of the reasons you think why that student might have been more engaged, why his brain might be more active during study or homework as opposed to class time. Just throw some ideas down onto the shared notes so that we can see what you're thinking. I'll just give you a few seconds to put some things down, and then I'll call some out. So we have the student maybe having to think for themselves. Perhaps they're multitasking. Perhaps they're coming up with original thoughts. Maybe it's a higher level learning task, whereas in class they're being fed information. Okay, have to act on their own thoughts, making choice about how they work. Maybe they're also multitasking, using Facebook and listening to music. So this is great. I think we can see already that actually maybe the reasons why students are more engaged, or this student is more engaged during homework or home study, was because perhaps they were able to work in their own learning style at the pace that they wanted to work, with the resources they wanted to use. Perhaps they used technology when they needed to, as opposed to it being forced upon them or not having access at all. Maybe environmental features such as the noise and the ambience and the seating in their place of study was important in how they were engaged. Maybe the work was more challenging because they were thinking for themselves rather than being led by the teacher. So I think the things that have come on the shared notes are really, really quite conclusive. That our role as a teacher is to make sure we can try and provide activities and opportunities for students in the classroom to be as engaged as they might be when they're planning their own learning and doing their own homework and study at home. So we're talking about students who are digitally literate. So here's a very quick summary of that. So in today's world, students are already digitally literate. So if they're starting school now, high school now rather, at the age of 11, they're born in 2002. If you think about the technology that was available in 2002, it's pretty much what we have today: the internet, mobile technology, fast search engines, etc. These are students who've grown up with that. They're digitally literate. They're always connected to the internet through their devices. They like to experience learning, and they're able to through multiple different sources. They're mobile in their communication and their ability to access learning. And they're still community orientated, although perhaps those are virtual communities now as much as real communities. So we need to think about what practices we're going to instill in our teachers to make them address those students, those types of learners. So those practices are things like having learner-centered activities, making sure that we have interactive opportunities for students in lessons, making sure that the learning they have is experiential, so they're able to actually understand it and apply it and adapt it to different contexts, and make sure that we're adaptive and flexible in our planning. All these skills are things that teachers are needing to develop and that we need to support them with as they start to design learning activities for today's learner. Here's a 21st century curriculum. One of the things that we have been hearing a lot about recently is 21st century skills. We're 13 years into the 21st century now, and we still haven't really come to a definition of what these things are. This is a curated list here of various different sources, things like the ITL research that you'll hear a bit about later, things like the Partnership for 21st Century Skills and those kind of organizations. These are the skills that we need to start building in our students alongside mathematics and science and those kind of subjects. There's things like critical thinking and problem solving and managing and gathering information, inquiry-based, project-based learning, etc. So when we're starting to think about a teacher today, we need to not only think about somebody who teaches a subject and is also a competent user of technology, but also somebody who can design learning activities that enable these kind of skills to be developed in their students. It's a very big task. And the other issue we need to worry about or think about is our learning ecosystem. We think back to perhaps when we were at school. I'm not going to tell you how old I am now, but certainly when I was at school, my learning ecosystem was pretty much entirely these four things. I was at the middle of it, the student there in the center, and I had access to information from my teacher, maybe from the library in the school or in the local town if I had one, perhaps from my friends, and maybe from my parents. That was my entire learning ecosystem. Today, the student's learning ecosystem is potentially vast. So the student's still at the center of that world, but now with access to not only the teacher and the classroom, but all these different resources and available pieces of learning. So it's entirely feasible today that you might take a classroom lecture on, let's say, something to do with photosynthesis, and between your first lesson on that subject, the student might go off to some online community to find out a little bit more about that topic. They might well join a video-on-demand lecture online to find out even more about photosynthesis or whatever your topic might be. They could join an expert blog and speak to people or read information from current scientists who are working in that field. They may even be able to IM with one of those scientists or go on Skype in the classroom and talk to them in real time. So while you're planning your second lesson on photosynthesis, the students may well have accessed much more information than you would have been able to give them in one lesson. And then they come back to your classroom and you tell them to turn the page. So if that's our only model of building a learning activity, taking a textbook or a fixed curriculum and thinking of it as linear step by step, we're perhaps missing out on a huge ecosystem that students are accessing that we need to be supporting and building on and bringing into our classrooms. So with that in mind, what does a teacher have access to today? In my teaching career, which ended about 10 years ago, I had maybe basic internet available to me, but mostly my access to knowledge and information about my subject, which was literature, was really from books and libraries and colleagues. If we think about a teacher today, they have access to information to support their subject and their learning from all these different areas. So colleagues are still in there, still critical, of course. But they can go to blogs and wikis with current, updated, curated information from around the world. They can go to social bookmarks and digital photo sites to find resources for their lessons. They can use media online and offline to build interactivity into their lessons. They have a huge network of available resources to them. available to them. So what does that mean for a teacher? What are the skills that a teacher needs to survive in today's world? And again, I want you to just use the shared notes very quickly to jot down your thoughts on what skills a teacher today might need aside from subject-based knowledge. I'll give you a couple of minutes to write some thoughts down. Good. So they must have knowledge of their subject. They must have business thinking. Okay, they need to be able to plan and adapt their lessons. Okay, so these flexibility skills, they need to be adaptable. Okay, excellent. Great thoughts there. Make sure you're looking at shared notes as well if you're able to. So here's a piece of research by a man called Andrew Churches. You can see the web address there. And this is the role of a teacher, or the skills that he felt a teacher needed to survive in today's world. So part of our job as professional development providers is to make sure that we're addressing these skills in teachers as well as supporting their use of technology, because actually technology helps them to do all these things. So they need to be a risk taker. One of the biggest hurdles to teachers using technology, in my experience, is that it is a risk. It is a gamble. It could go wrong. It might make their lesson suffer. It takes a lot of time. So you do need to be a risk taker to actually incorporate technology into your lesson planning. You do need to be a collaborator. The best way to learn is to teach. So why not get the students to help you collaborate in learning design and help to deliver some of those activities in the classroom, collaborate with them, collaborate with your colleagues and peers, not just in your school, but through professional learning communities, formal and informal, such as Twitter and Facebook groups. Make sure that we're a leader in our classroom, that we lead learning, that we show students the way to learn, and that we are involved in that process ourselves. We might need to be visionary. We definitely need to be great communicators, and perhaps we have to be adaptable. So here's some skills that we need to consider in teaching, as well as subject knowledge, as well as using technology. So it's a big ask for us as PB providers to come up with programs to enable us to address all these particular needs in teachers to support students' learning. However, we're delighted that the program that you're looking at today, or you'll be looking at in a moment, has resources available to you to help try and address some of these issues. I'm going to hand over to Tracy shortly to go through a little bit more about that. But first of all, is there any questions, if you want to put them into the Q&A pane or in the shared notes, any direct questions you want to ask about where we've got to so far in this webcast? The Q&A pane is looking pretty clear at the moment, which is a good thing. Okay, great. We'll move on then. So I want us to think very quickly now about professional development. So we're talking mostly about how can we, as trainers and peer coaches, support other colleagues to be as innovative as we are in our work. So we're talking about professional development. Here's a list of professional development strategies that you've probably either been involved in as a delegate or participant, or you've perhaps used yourself in programs that you put together. I want you to have a quick read of that list. And again, using that select tool at the bottom of the screen, the tick, I want you to just tick on there the one that you think would be the most successful model of professional development. So have a quick read through of those. Select the tick at the bottom of the screen and put your mark next to the type of PD that you think would be the most impactful in your experience. Okay, so we're getting lots of ticks around one-to-one coaching, whether you're delivering it or receiving it. Okay. Observing a colleague getting a few ticks, practicing a new method. Okay, great, thank you. So here is some research that's been carried out by SRI International with Innovative Teaching and Learning Research, and Tracy's going to touch on that a little bit later on. And you can see there is that list of PD, types of PD, and the scores that they received. This is a survey that was done over many countries over the last 3 or 4 years. And clearly coming out on top, the most impactful strategy for professional development of teachers is being able to practice a new teaching method. The least useful and impactful is listening to a lecture or observing somebody else. So it's very clear from that research that actually what is most important is to be able to have time to go back to your classroom, back to your schools, and try out a new method. And with trying comes failing. So we need to give people time to iterate on their practice and to support that trial and error process. I had a lovely quote the other day which was using the word fail. And the person that was using that word in a conference said that fail stands for first attempt in learning, which I thought was a really nice way of thinking about fail as a positive rather than a negative. So it's really important that in our programs and the programs you're going to see shortly will highlight this, that we give teachers the time to go back and practice and try things out in the classroom and get some feedback, see what works and what doesn't. Try again, make that first attempt in learning and fail, and come back and be supported in trying something different. So it's really important we bear that in mind when building programs. One-off interventions are least successful. We need to be thinking about programs that are long-term and supported and continuous. So some new models of professional development that are available to us. Action research, which is increasingly on the rise. More and more now I'm seeing this embedded into strategies. So action research is where teachers and educators are involved in a research-based reflective process, maybe as part of community of practice. Mentoring, where you have a professional relationship in which one person, perhaps a more experienced person, supports a junior colleague on a particular topic. Peer coaching, which is a confidential process where two or more colleagues are working together to reflect on practice. Professional development schools are becoming more and more common, certainly in the UK and Western Europe, where I've been working recently, where you have schools and universities working together to deliver on-site professional development. And the professional learning communities, where you have practitioners working together on a structured way to raise learner outcomes, and professional learning networks, which is an informal network of professional development, such as Twitter groups and Facebook groups. So if you look at Teachmeet, will be another good example of that. So I've asked you on that slide, and thank you for filling it in so quickly, what you do already, and we're seeing a lot of those examples there being covered already, and what you'd like to learn more about. This will help us to actually inform further programs as part of this initiative from Microsoft, so it's really useful information for us. But I want you to be thinking as well about using those models and types in your practice when you start to develop your programs for the coming months. And again, in the toolkit that you'll be showing later, there is resources available to you to help you set up these kind of professional development activities for yourself. Okay, so it's a very quick, very bird's eye view of 21st century teaching and learning, what students in today's world are like, what employers' needs are, how the role of the teacher is changing, how it's integral as professional development providers and peer coaches to make sure that we're aware of all this when we're building our training programs, but not just delivering functional technology-type training programs, but we're building pedagogically sound professional development programs that support all these different pieces of requirements that we have in education today. And as I've mentioned a couple of times, this program that we're introducing you today has many resources available to you to help you build these ideas into your existing programs. I'm going to hand over to Tracy now, who's going to talk a little bit more about how the program has been structured and how it's been built and the rationale behind this program that we're talking about today.
Great. Thanks so much, Adrian. And thank you all for your engagement. It's been so exciting to see everybody using the tools of this platform. It's great when you have an opportunity to engage with the content and not just be sitting back as a passive listener. And so, to the extent possible, here with 200 people on the call, we're trying very hard to model at least some of the best practices in a way that we can, given the limitations of a online learning environment.